Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Joel, for being with us. Such
Miguel.
a privilege this week having you here until next Saturday. So it's great to have you. I don't know what Malaga is going to do after you leave. I mean, something's going to be missing here. I mean, your show will be here for 6 months, but
Yes.
how have you felt here during these days?
The first few days were very tumultuous. I felt the shock of being back here and seeing the Malaga that I knew transformed into the Malaga of today, the kind of activity on the streets, the new signage. I felt a little lost, really. But over the last few days, having walked through the city all around, I began to feel that sense of, I remember the feeling here and this street. And so it's as if my vocabulary, not my Spanish vocabulary, my visual vocabulary has been returning to me.
So we are presented today, during this conversation, the book, the catalog of the exhibition, which is a beautiful catalog. We talked with La Fábrica and Underbau, the designers, and it's a beautiful book that I invite you to grab a copy, and maybe after the conference, maybe you have time for the people here to sign
Absolutely.
a copy. But it's a beautiful book. And maybe the presentation of the catalog also needs like context of what happened between the moment I met you and today. Because it's such a journey, and we were talking before about how the own exhibition is a journey over a journey. I met Joel. We were making memories the other day with Maggie and Joel. I think it was 10 years ago. I was walking in a gallery, through a gallery in a festival. I think it was Paris Photo.
Our photo, yeah.
And then I saw a picture of Joel, a photograph by Joel, and it reminded me of my country. It reminded me of Spain. So I started to look to your Phaidon book, this great catalog, like a catalog raisonné of your book, of your work. And then I realized that there were some momentum in Spain for you in the 60s. I knew about your travel in Europe, about your MoMA show in 1968, but I didn't know that there was this sojourn in Spain. So I reached you, I sent you an email, and you directly said that something happened in Spain, particularly in Malaga, and that you stayed here for 6 months. So the mystery and the magic of the way you reacted to my question about how come there was a picture of Spain in this book, like 10, 15 pictures of Spain, how come it was so important for you to say that it was magical, the mystery of flamenco? You mentioned at the very beginning this family of Escalonas. So I felt, as an Spaniard, although being from the north, but loving the south as I do, I felt that something was happening there, because it was not the typical romantic view of an explorer going in this grand tour through Europe, looking for Granada, Sevilla, Alhambra. There was something else. There was a mystery of the home of the Escalonas and the mystery of flamenco. So I would like to ask you, as the first question for me in this conversation, which is going to be like a jazz session, and like with movement as you like it, how come Malaga became such a space for you, for your growing and your coming of age as a man, as a photographer? You told us something in the press conference.
Can I address the audience when I do this?
Yeah.
Because you know this story already, but I could tell it to them.
For sure.
It's a great question, and it's an essential question. I was 28 years old. I had only been photographing for 4 years. I made a little money in New York on an advertising job in 1966, and suddenly I thought, I have to leave America and go to Europe. I had a real sense of my own European ancestry, the mystery of it. I didn't really know any of my grandparents who had fled Eastern Europe during the pogroms of the late 19th century. But I had this calling, I guess, and So I took that money, and my wife, Vivian, at the time, and I took a boat from New York City to Southampton, England, and there we traveled around England for a while and came over to France and immediately went down to Spain. And in England, I met my old boss when I was working as an art director in New York. And at his home was a guy called Pablo Hecht. He was an American from Brooklyn, and he had been living in Malaga for a couple of years, spoke Malagueñan Spanish fantastically well, with all the right endings and the right spirit. Anyway, he said, hey, if you come to Spain and you get to Malaga, look me up. I'm down there, and I'm writing a book on flamenco. I'm taking every coplas from the songs, and I'm writing them down because they were only passed by song. They were never written. Anyway, we did arrive in Malaga in late November of 1966. I looked Pablo up at a bar, which is no longer here, Guerola.
It's in Torremolinos.
It's Torremolinos.
It's already there.
Yeah, but the original one was where everybody seemed to hang out. Anyway, on that night, he took us directly to the Escalona family over in Barrio 26 de Febrero, over in Trinidad, La Trinidad, right? Around there. And we were plunged into the life of this gypsy flamenco family who were not cafe flamenco, they were cantejando, the dark song, and really serious musicians. And so our life just began by that first, instant of hearing something new, being with a family inside the culture, not in a hotel, in a bar on the street, but somehow in the immediacy of it. And that became our daily cycle. And by having that base, that foundation, I went out on the streets of Malaga, and I began to understand something about myself as an artist and as a man. Because something about the way Spanish men handled themselves, probably not politically correct now or then, but it was something that gave me a sense of a clarity and an identity. And at the same time, I was on my own. I didn't have my friends in New York who I generally walked the streets with. So these two conditions, being solo in the streets and being in a culture where masculinity had a different angle, gave me something. And it was ineffable at first. Couldn't identify it. All I knew is that I was passing through a period of change. And when I returned to New York at the end of that year, I had not seen one photograph for an entire year. I had to believe that my camera was doing the right thing. When I started processing and printing those photographs, it was all there. The Malaga experience was the centerpiece of a whole year of living in Europe.
It's great to see all your database of the whole bunch of images, 9,000 pictures from Europe, that trip, and realizing that in Spain there is not that archetypal image of Spain and the image of the Grand Tour of these famous photographers in the 19th century.
Yeah.
There's a sense of history which is quite contemporary, and I think it's something I told you at the very beginning of our relationship, how those images were so contemporary to me. They were in color. The people in Malaga seemed not very away from my own generation. They looked to my parents or my grandparents, and so I had this sense of being in front of a contemporary view of our country. And so, in a way, you created this atmosphere of realness and real life, of Spanish life, which I think is really valuable. The way you portrayed reality here in Spain, which is something probably is part of the soul of the country. Family, houses, how we meet together, we hang in bars, we talk, we listen to music, we share. So probably something happened in the sense of this realness of a house that received you and the family, Escalonas. And that projected into the city because you had that rhythm at night with the Escalonas, and during the day you were free in the streets.
Well, you know, I think if you grow up in a city, like New York City, you have a particular rhythm. There's a certain way one walks through a city, how a photographer, anyway, looks at the way the culture is presenting itself. And in my case, you know, I brought the New York sensibility with me. I brought the timing, the speed with which I react to things. And over the years, I've learned, or maybe I've studied, how to read the text of the street. Whatever is coming at me in terms of people, the way they're dressed, the cars, or the horse-drawn wagons, or whatever street amusements there were, young gypsy kids playing a trumpet and having a goat on a ladder dancing. I mean, the stuff of life was right there. And I felt like I was fully immersed in the street. I was in the stream, swimming in the stream, and the people were fantastic. The expressions and the gestures and the type of clothing and the mix between the government, the power of the government and the ordinary people. This was really interesting too. Being in a dictatorship, coming from America, it was interesting to bring that into the content that I was sort of sifting on the streets. So I really felt at home. And the more I walked around Malaga day after day, the more the map of the city was in me. So I knew, you know, at 2:30 it's good to go to that part of town. In the morning it's good to be over here. So it's learning who you are in the place where you find yourself is a wonderful adventure, really.
Let me ask you about the beginning of your career, because you also told us the other day in the press conference, before you came here, you've been photographing for 4 years in New York. But before that, I think it's very interesting to know, you were talking about swimming now, about swimming in the streets. Can you explain us, and can you tell the audience here, you're beginning as a training artist in Ohio, studying fine arts, also being almost a professional swimmer going to the Olympics. How do you see yourself when you were 18, 19 years old, trying to be trained as a painter, as an illustrator, then becoming a graphic designer, and then seeing Robert Frank in the streets for a job he was doing for you, and then realizing that you wanted to become a photographer? I mean, but if you go back to when you were 18 and you moved to Ohio to become an artist, a painter, an abstract painter, probably?
Yeah. Well, I was just a dumb kid who was still asleep. And I woke up one day in an art school in Columbus, Ohio, where I did go because my grades weren't so great that I could go to Columbia or Yale or Harvard. So a school in the Midwest accepted me, and I was a swimmer, and they had a great swimming team. So I had a passion for swimming, and I thought it would be a good fit. But ultimately, I missed going to the Olympics by 0.3 of 1 second. Somebody else, you know, had slightly better time than me over a whole year. 0.3.
It's just a picture of you. I mean, it's just a snapshot. It's just.
It's like that. It's like when you hit the walls. Anyway, it freed me to be deeper in art school and not practicing every day. And actually, this is the perfect place to say this, because in Ohio in 1955, they were just discovering Cubism. It was a little late. getting there. And so the teachers were talking about Picasso a lot. And in so many of the classes I took, the power of this Spanish artist was being revealed in many different ways, in paintings and drawings and sculptures and the figure and you know, the fracture of a kind of fragmented reality of the early 20th century. And you know, I just somehow, coming from New York, I felt a connection to his work. And what I really learned in that art school is that if you want to be an artist, you have to put your 10,000 hours in of doing it. And then maybe you'll get to some place where you understand something about the medium, something about your life, and the world around you. And he was, for me, such a Promethean figure, you know. He was like touching everything, and he gave it life. And I think throughout my life, it's been a background for me that you keep looking inside of yourself for more. You know, it doesn't matter if some of it isn't any good. It just means you keep digging for something closer to your own identity. So I did get that from him. And really art school it did what it's supposed to do. It gave me a sense of the history of art. Photography was never mentioned. I was never even interested in photography. I had no sense of its history or its, you know, who the players were, who the great photographers were. I was interested in painting, and that's what my, you know, history background was. So to come to a point, a turning point in New York, where I had a job in a small advertising agency, and I made a little design for a small booklet, and my boss hired the photographer Robert Frank, who was a friend of his, to photograph this booklet. And when I went to observe him to make sure he did all the pages, what I saw instead was the magic of movement and time. The fact that as the subject matter in front of him, two young girls, were moving back and forth, he was floating with them and making photographs. And every time I heard the click of the camera, the moment in front of him seemed to be frozen in just the absolute peak of the gesture. It's as if his timing and his intuition were predicting what might happen next. And that, as a concept, was profound. And so when I left this afternoon shooting and went out on the street, everything on the street seemed to me to be heightened reality. Every gesture, every way people carried themselves, whether they were up or whether I mean, all of it seemed to have meaning. And as I walked back to my agency, I was mentally doing like that and holding on to these little fragments of time. The blink of an eye can give you what a photograph does in a sense. It's that quick, you know. So that to me, that's the genesis of that. When I returned to that office, I quit my job. That day, that afternoon, I said to the art director, what I saw changed my life. I want to be a photographer. And so I stayed the next 2 days or so and made sure it all looked good. And on Friday, I left. And I went out on the street with a borrowed camera, his camera, and I've been out of work since.
That's a good boss, right? He was a good boss.
He was a good boss. In fact, the next year, he left New York and lived the rest of his life in Mijas. He bought the church in Mijas in 1965 and fixed it up and lived in that church his entire life.
And that's the way he met Paul Hecht, Pablo el Americano. They met,
yeah,
both of them. And the first night you arrived to London,
Yes.
you met them.
Yeah, he happened to be
So
there.
your boss connected also to
I mean,
Malaga.
it's as if, you know, something lines up. You don't know it. You're going this way, and all these other forces are lining up, and at the moment you're there, something happens, and your life is changed.
And I love this idea when you talk about the way you saw Robert Frank moving in reality and reacting to reality, and the way you move. That's why I loved that you mentioned swimming in reality in a way. And I remember once you talked about how that connected to your own history as a training artist, as an abstract painter. You saw in that movement a reaction to abstract painting in a way. So the way he was moving and the way you could move within the reality gave you that opportunity for you to react. So it was like painting in reality, the way you took pictures at the beginning.
You're absolutely right. It was, you know, sometimes you have a clarification. Some idea comes to you from wherever, something you observe in the street, something you hear someone say. And what happened for me, watching him convert their energy into a frozen moment, and yet what it was that he was photographing was nearly invisible. It's leaving. As it's happening, it's disappearing. And that's the connection I think was most like abstract expressionism, which is gestural. And in the course of the gesture, you begin to feel beauty or motion or the way paint is being dragged across the surface. Something is pulling you along. And for me, it was this idea that the invisible reality is only made visible when the shutter goes, and you have the sense that you should be there at that moment. And you press the button to hold on to this thing, which you don't quite know yourself. I mean, I never really know if that thing that I saw or felt was substantial. I just have a sense, oh, it's coming together, and I put myself in the right place at the right time. That's the job of a photographer who works in reality. You know? And so I think I felt the freedom of movement and the sweet spot that happens when you try to align yourself with something, to be in the moment. I mean, it's a Zen sensibility, but it's also purely photographic. Is because we only live in the now, right? So every time you press the button, it's now. Yes, now. And that now is an affirmation. And I just feel it all comes together in a very physical and muscular way.
So abstract expressionism and action painting as an inspiration in a way. So you were reacting to reality through this action of the movement of your camera and clicking.
Yeah, it's like it's a dance in a way. It's a dance with a partner who doesn't acknowledge you. Daily life doesn't give a crap about what we're doing. We're just in it with everybody else. And so one has to have develop a sensibility about what things in daily life are my things. I mean, daily life is this way, 360 degrees, but we're just looking here. So this little 70-degree piece is our scan. And so trying to make sense of this little field, a field of possibility, it's a great game. And it's a sporting game, too, because you have to be there. You have to be awake. You have to be present. Your camera has to be in your hand. It has to be ready. And the language of the street has to be something you're interested in so that it opens you up. I mean, it's a lot of preparation in a way.
Rothko gave a recipe about art making, and he said in 1958, 7 ingredients to create a work of art. One of them is finality, sense of finality, knowing where you want to go. Second, sensuality towards reality. Tension, irony, wit, chance, and hope. So
Quite a package.
yeah, package. But I was thinking when you were mentioning your own formula, you were mentioning in a way those aspects. So because you're taking advantage of reality, you're putting your energy through your own sensibility and sensuality towards reality, and you're creating something. You're prepared to react to reality and offer something to the audience or to your viewer. So I think it's a gift.
Well, first it's offering it to myself, because when you have the set of values, let's say, you don't know if they work. Mm-hmm. You have to keep going out there and doing it, and then the photograph is the proof. No, it didn't work. I didn't see anything. I was too late. It makes no sense. And every once in a while, something does make sense, and that's the one you put aside and you say, oh, that's who I am now. And if you keep on pulling those into the center and looking at those, that's the way your sense of self develops. And it's how you can almost predict when things are going to get good.
So you give room to your own emotions, and you give the space to create an identity of your own self.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's the craziest system, the photographic system, because when a painter is making a painting, it's all there, every moment, for as many days, weeks, months as they want to do that. Photography, you press the button, that's it. Nowadays, with digital cameras, you can look at the back, but that's a waste of time when you're on the street, because as soon as you look at the back, you're no longer looking at life. You're looking at a picture that you made that's already gone. So I never look at the camera when I'm outside, because I don't want to miss a moment of the spectacle in front of me.
So we have the map here of Europe. It's a map that is included in the book. Do you want to show the audience where is the map?
This is the first book, and I only just unwrapped it in behind stage here a few minutes ago. But look at this. Hidden in the cover, ta-da, is a wall map of the trip. I think it's a good idea. They're really very playful. The designers of this book are really good.
Because you were talking, we began to talk about the book, about how you drove Europe using a map. And this idea of putting that as a jacket in the cover of the book and create a memory which we have forget about. We now use Google Maps, not too far away, we were using maps, printed maps, and we were making signs. And so the idea of putting that as a jacket and drawing the map, the route that you took, is a fabulous idea to have it as a memory. So
yeah, I tell you, having had to go over the entire trip, from the notes I had and the memories I had, to make sure I found all the roads that I took and the way I went from place to place. And the great thing about a map, rather than a device, is that you get lost with a map, but you discover a lot of other things, which is really what a journey or travel should be about, is getting lost and discovering new things, unpredictable things. So it starts up in the north, in England, in London. We could start in London, and
what happened?
And I just traveled down to Cornwall and up to Wales and over to Ireland and through Ireland to the north, and then down to Dublin and across to Scotland and down Scotland and all the way, all around through England and back to London, and then across to France on a ferry, and then a slow trip through France down to San Sebastian in the north of Spain, and then slowly, it was getting cold up there. Going over the Pyrenees was like that. and then finally down to Malaga. And, after 2.5 months on the road, it was wonderful to be in Malaga with the sweetness of the air. The city was a really small, intimate city. To be inside the culture with the Escalonas. And suddenly it was like, oh, let's spend as long as we want here. And 6 months unfolded in like a dream, really. Every day was open-hearted. And we took a lot of trips with the Escalones, with Antonio and Remedios, his wife, and sometimes some of the kids would come. Sometimes in search of other singers who cantadores in the flamenco, other times to find a dancer or just out there in the flamenco world. A lot of discoveries of people who were well known, but they lived very humble lives. One of the great singers was a butcher in the town of Montefrio, but he had a voice like the best.
Yeah, the question I made you 10 years ago was, out of that trip, 1 year, you stayed here for half of that trip, 6 months. So something happened. It's just the atmosphere of the city, but what we were mentioning before, the atmosphere of a family and the atmosphere of hospitality and the atmosphere of flamenco and the mystery, the duende, Garcia Lorca, many things were happening there. And then you had this plan of going to the rest of Europe. You had that plan of 1 year with Vivian, your wife at that moment. But the exhibition, in a way, tries to portray what happened for you to stay 6 months here. And I think it's a beautiful way of portraying your own reality. And now you living in Europe, living with Maggie for many years here in Italy and now in London. And your own reality in Europa, the title of the show in Espanol, we left that as a sign of the importance of Spain in your own history in Europe. But I think it's beautiful to see that it's a portrait of you in Europe and your relationship to Europe and how you have been constructing this idea of Europe, which I think is very necessary nowadays. So.
Yeah, well, you know, it's a big subject to take on, and at the beginning I never thought that I was going to do that, and I'm not even sure I have, but I traveled through it, and I had a chance to look at the way different cultures live, the different values that one recognizes when you cross a border. And so I felt as if I was gathering a kind of understanding of these cultures, many of which were my grandparents' history. And where I lived in New York City was on a block that was really a block filled, a street. There were 3,000 people on the one street that I lived on. And they were mostly Italians from Puglia, Napoli, Sicilia, or they were Irish from Ireland, or they were people from Eastern Europe, Poland and Hungary, and even parts of Russia, Ukraine, etc. And so growing up in that environment in which life was lived outside, in which the markets are just like Atarantas here, you know, wide open, fish stalls and vegetables, and that's how I lived. There were no supermarkets. And so coming to Europe felt like the most natural thing to me. And coming back, and here, bear with me for a moment, my wife Maggie Barrett is here, and about 12 years ago, Maggie, having heard me talk about Europe and that year in Europe and how it was a wonderful year for me, but my marriage relationship at the time was really dissolving. So I always wanted to come back to Europe and be with the woman I love. And 12 years ago, Maggie said, listen, why don't we go to Europe for a year and see what happens? That was 12 years ago, and we're still here. We lived in Italy for 10 years and now in London. And if it wasn't for Maggie, you and I would never have met. And none of us would be here. History would have been completely changed. Thank you, Maggie, for your instinct and your intuition. And really, what a gift you've given me.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'm showing here one of the first images I saw from Spain, which seemed to me familiar. Cantabria, Santillana del Mar, Parador de Santillana
del Mar. It's a parador.
It's still, we were seeing this picture with the team before, and it says the same. If you go to Santillana del Mar, it will be probably the same same atmosphere, different cars for sure. You know, you see here Seat 600. I don't know if that's your car. I think your car was a black
Yeah,
Volvo.
no,
It's
that's
not
not
here.
the car.
And also, you were mentioning you were crossing the mountains to La Meseta,
Yeah.
we say here. You were crossing probably Puerto del Escudo in Cantabria, going up very high. It was
Yeah.
winter, very cold.
You could see how cold it was.
Yeah, you were freezing there. And how you cross all this, they call it here Valles Paseos, which is in Cantabria and Burgos. Beautiful space, beautiful landscape. And I always love this picture. It's not in the show, but I love the atmosphere that you capture here with all these shadows and this greenish and
Yeah.
the atmosphere of that mountain there in these small houses. And then you arrive to Castilla, I mean, you know, flat surface until you got driving your Volvo.
This picture and the one before were made from a moving car. While I'm driving, I also made photographs. And so interesting that the two of them are together there.
And then you arrive to Malaga. But yeah, if maybe we can talk about the images, the group of images that are here in the show, also about these 40 images that were shown in MoMA in 1968 after you returned to New York, and how also this feature, the way you portrayed reality through a moving car, and how you felt inside the camera through the window. Because that was a performative action. You were talking before about abstract painting and movement and, you know, action painting through your own photographs. And here you were in a car, 100 kilometers per hour, even more, I don't know. And then you taking pictures, and reality was, you know, flowing around you. How did it happen? I mean, how you you created this idea of, let's take pictures from the car.
I'm sure you and everybody have been in a car going along someplace and you see something, then you say, oh, look. But by the time you say, look at this, it's gone. But you saw something that had a moment to it, some fragile beauty or some gestural moment or some interaction between people alongside the road, and it stirred you to pay attention. So that kind of thing happened to me many times when I was driving around America and then Europe. And what I started to do was just carry the camera sitting in my lap, and this camera says 1,000th of a second on it, so you can set it to 1,000th of a second and focus it for out there, and then keep it in your lap. And when something happens, you do this. And if you have spent that 10,000 hours that I said, when I raise this camera, I know where the edges are. I can visualize what the camera is seeing because I've used it for so many thousands and thousands of hours that I'm totally comfortable with it. I love looking through the camera when I'm on the street, but when you're driving, better to look where you're going. But what really happened, and you know, we've talked about this before, is that when you're inside your car, the window in the front is like a camera. It's the picture. Life is always a picture. It's inside of a frame. And you may not think of it that way, but after this moment, you always will. You're sitting like that, and there it is. And that's your reality. And everything that goes on in that frame is as if your life depends on it, because it does. You can't not pay attention. So I think I felt I was inside a camera. I was driving a camera, and so I was more finely tuned to the possibilities that were out there. And you know, all you have to do is raise the camera and make a click, and then when the time comes to view the photographs, in my case, I had almost 4,000 images from the car. And they were so surprising, like this one here, that I felt that I had something like an original thought, and that this body of work was a game. And so I took it up to the Museum of Modern Art. And I remember I was waiting to show it to the director, who was a friend of mine, and there was another curator there. And he said, "What do you have in the box?" And I gave him the box. He looked through the pictures like that. He put them in the box. He put the cover on. He handed it back to me. And I thought, he doesn't get it. There's something here. I took it to John, and John Charkowski, who was the head of MoMA. He looked at the pictures, then looked at them all over again, kept on looking at me like, you did that? At the end of looking, he said, let's make a show. And I thought, one guy would throw them in the garbage, and the other guy would put them up in the museum. So that's why he's my friend. It was, and when I left, Peter at the desk said, so what did John think? And I said, we're making a show. I left.
I can imagine that show changed your life. I mean, because showing at the MoMA, I mean, you always said that at that moment in history of photography was in the basement of MoMA, right?
Yeah, yeah. Photography was thought of as a craft or as a commercial thing. The art of photography wasn't being seriously considered in the early 1960s. It was storytelling. But John Charkowski had been a photographer, and he's a real scholar. And so when he came to MoMA, he brought with him a different kind of curiosity. And he began to uplift the medium by taking on risky shows. And my show was a risky show for him because it had never been seen before, pictures from a moving car. And you know, he saw it as the very first conceptual photography show. In that my concept was, I know I'm going to be driving 20,000 miles. I'm going to probably photograph all the way through. I don't have to get out of the car all the time. So that, you know, that was my good fortune. But there was no audience, really. There was one review in the New York Times, but it's not like it changed anything. You know, only for people who really loved photography was it something to talk about. But it was, you know, tight quarters.
It's beautiful to see the show here.
Yeah.
I mean, we have used the same layout. We have John Sapkowski wall text, and we talked with MoMA. I talked to Anne Tenkin, the chief curator of MoMA. I told her about this exhibition, and she was glad about how almost 50 years, almost 60 years later, we are doing the same show within a show. So it's another meta journey about your journey. So it's, and someone was telling me the other day, it's a small chapel about your own trip. I mean, the kind of a soul of
chapel.
So you can circulate through the different countries, and then you have these 40 vintage prints in the center of the show, which I think works beautiful.
I'm really grateful. All the prints in that room in the show are prints that I made right after I came back from Europe, and I made expressly for the Museum of Modern Art. So they're the original vintage prints, and they actually look pretty good, I thought. I'm so used to Photoshop now, but that's nice.
And then you arrived to Malaga. I always loved this picture. It's one of my favorites from Malaga. I don't know exactly the street, but I'm sure during the show we'll have people who say, what's the bar, if it's still a bar, or if it's now, I don't know, a drugstore or anything, but...
I can't find my way to it. I've already looked on my walks, and I can't seem to find that intersection. It's just so built up now.
What happens in this image? Because this fragmentation of reality that usually describes your work of art, I mean your photography, how this multiplicity of reactions and realities, and the guy in the center listening to a radio. What was your reaction to that moment in a bar in Malaga?
Interestingly, when we were preparing for this exhibition, I went back to the original negatives, and I looked at the 3 or 4 negatives before this and then after to see how did I do that. And you know, I think most often photographers, particularly when they're younger, put things sort of in the middle of the frame. It's like just the gesture, you want to get it, so you move the camera and you nail it in the middle. But after working in Malaga steadily, I began to have this feeling, like my own fresh idea, that maybe I can make more complicated frames where things are here and here and here, and you have to look all over the frame just like life itself. So when I went back to the negatives, I see that I was actually outside first, where the goat is, and you can see alongside the wall, there's a guy playing a trumpet. And his sister is over there on the far corner with the drum. And they were some, gypsy kids who were making entertainment on the streets. So I was out there photographing them. But while I was looking at them, I saw him in the window. The way he was tilted over and holding on to this, I just had a sense, that's interesting, I have to go there. What is it? And so I circled around, I went in, and now I was looking at him. He's blind. He's got his radio on, covered with a paper napkin. He's holding it so that he can feel the vibration in his hands, and he's listening very carefully to whatever it was. So I saw him on the inside, kind of a poignant, tender moment. And outside was the circus, the circus of the world, Really, and circus is beautiful, right? It means this. It's the circuit, and it's full of the crazy entertainment of life. And so I made this pressure. I put him with the beautiful quality of the light coming down on the inside, and the outside, I just kept on watching how it was filling up. And there are those people on a motorcycle over there, and all of the gypsies playing, and the traffic in the background. And it just felt to me that I was compressing everything. And that, for me, sometimes a photograph is the turning point. You make that picture, and from that point on, your life just changes course a little bit, because you learned something. You earned that picture. And by doing that, it's nourishing. It gives you a sense of, I'm now looking. I was here, and now I'm looking from here. It's as if a little bit of height comes into you through understanding something. So I really feel that Malaga, over and over and over again, gave me the tools to move forward with my work. But there is one, Pepe Luque. Can I tell that story?
Yeah, for sure.
So in Malaga, there's a place called the Peña Juan Breva, right? It's the establishment where afición and flamenco come together. And it was founded by a lawyer here, Pepe Luque, Don Pepe Luque. I don't know what the law firm is called. But he would regularly come to all the flamenco that the Escalones played, and he was very supportive of them. And one day, in the afternoon, I was walking around in Malaga, and I saw him, and we came together on the street. And he asked me where I was going, and I said, I'm just going out for a walk. And he said, I'll come with you. And I said, oh, great. I said, but, you're a lawyer. Don't you have to be in the office? And he said, yeah, but I'd rather be with you. And, the look on my face was so, pleased, really. And he stopped then. I don't think he took me like this, but we stopped, and he said, the one thing you have to know is that in life, you have to spend yourself freely. And those few words, how would you say that in Spanish?
Vive tu vida libremente. O usa tu tiempo libremente. O vive tu vida de una manera libre.
Okay. What do you think?
Yeah?
We have the translator here.
Concha lo puede traducir.
So you must spend yourself freely.
Sí.
Okay. Okay. Anyway, I got the message, even with the Spanish that I spoke then, which I could communicate, but I wasn't fluent. But I got the message, and I realized I've lived with that as my center my entire life since then. That when anything comes up, you know, and I feel the urge to be there to do it, I listen to Don Pepe tell me, Joel, spend yourself freely. Give it away. And so that I learned in Malaga. And you know, it's those combinations that give one a sense of their growing up. You know, and so I really, you know, if it was only that and the Escalones, it would be more than enough.
So giving time to your own art practice and having a sense of hospitality for your own emotions, and you know, giving time for your own self to develop these ideas. And you were mentioning before, maybe you take a picture and do this, I mean, it's not something that you liked, and then you take another, you're giving time to your own self to develop ideas and develop your identity through thousands and thousands of hours through your lens. So that advice from Pepe Luque, I think, is very valuable. I think we can take it in different dimensions, in different perspectives, creative or not creative. I mean, giving time for your own self to develop what you want to do.
Yeah.
And you also talk in the documentary we have here in the galleries about when you have this sense of necessity, you have this sense of creating an artwork, creating a picture, you have to follow that. So you have to stick to that passion and to that necessity you sense, you feel. So
yeah, if you don't, the alternative is you're asleep. I mean, I feel like photography is a way of being conscious. Having a camera in my hand and looking at the world, not at my phone, but at the world, gives me a sense of necessity, right? The moments happen and they wake me up. And that's the moment I make a photograph. And even if it isn't a really good photograph, it doesn't matter. I'm responding to something, I'm connecting to something. And maybe it's just sharpening my visual instrument for the next thing that's going to happen. Because if you don't take that, if you cancel yourself, if you say, never mind. If you keep on doing that, it's over. It's as if you're now judging yourself rather than accepting whatever is coming your way. I think acceptance is at the heart of photography, because I don't control anything that's out there. I never say to somebody, oh, could you stop and do that again for me? It isn't, that's not reality. Reality is something that's happening on its own that carries a sense of possibility, of beauty, or of intensity, or of longing, some human emotion. And I think that, you know, I've lived a life of trying to respond to human emotions visible on the street and find those ones that are so tender that people, you know, keep them within. But if I see them in the act of happening, that's a gift for me.
I remember once we talked about Rano and this sentence about the small fraction that takes from our own reality. I mean, it's just a fraction of a second. So you've put the 200 images we have here. The time is only 2 seconds of your own reality.
Yeah.
But 2 seconds in which you are fully awake. So I don't know if you can develop that, because you've been taking thousands and thousands of images, and you've been fully awake for many, many good times in your life. So you've been reacting to reality in such a way.
Well, you know, the book was by the French photographer Joanneau, and I think it was called 3 Seconds to Eternity, because he said all the pictures he made, if you add up the speed in which they were taken at, let's say they were taken at a 250th of a second. So that means 1 second divided 250 times. So he had 750 good pictures in his life, and that's 3 seconds in total. And so, what a great title for a book. 3 seconds to eternity. And that's really a measure of the kind of moments of consciousness, if you want, because you're responding yourself at that speed. You're recognizing, even before it happens, you're aware that something is doing this, and you join it in gesture, in observation, in a kind of prediction that this might be worthy. That's a gamble. That's a real gambling game. No wonder most photographers quit after 10 years. Why did I hang around for 60 years? That's the question.
Yeah.
Because life is endlessly fascinating.
Yeah. And music, final chapter of our conversation, which is the mystery, part of the mystery what you lived here for 6 months is flamenco. You came here to Malaga. In your Volvo, you had this tape recorder, tape recorder, Mike Spaniel. What's the name of your friend at the U.S. Navy?
Mickey.
Mickey
Spanier.
Yeah. He told you should buy this tape recorder, and you took it. It was very cheap, I guess. I mean, something happened for you to take the opportunity because you were not looking for a tape recorder, I'm sure. You were.
I had no reason for it at all, but he insisted, and it was on a U.S. air base, and so it was very costly, but it was inexpensive because it was there. So he said, take it. You might need it someday. And I did, right here in Malaga.
So we're going to listen for some minutes, one of the songs, and maybe you can explain something about what's going on in the sound we're going to hear, recorded by you, which is beautiful. Yeah. So if you can...
What he just sang are the songs of Tomás Pavón, the brother of La Niña de los Peines. Long, difficult soleares. No one in Spain makes the sound of Tomás Pavón like Manolo Ávila. The next song is the Petenera.
Cuando yo te conocí, que estaba el cielo en tinieblas y a mi corazón la echao a mi corazón una cortinita negra. Cuando yo te conocí, cuando yo te conocí, que estaba al cielo en tinieblas. Compañera de mi alma, compañera de mi alma, tú dices que no siento nada, si las carnes de mis huesos, si las carnes de mis huesos a pedazos se me va, compañera de mi alma, tú dices que no siento nada. Me acuerdo de ti más veces, cogiste en un manzano, que hojas tiene un peral, alma mía, y de los dos, coriza tiene un peral, un calvellana, una bellana, me acuerdo de ti más ahí no hay pero, me salió muy bien.
Listening to Pepe Luque talking after La Petenera, Viña Los Peines.
Ay, que va llorando por la calle.
So this is Manuel telling him how he should have done that.
Que no siente más de ti, que artista no seguro. Una vez está para matarlo. Estaba por morir. Para matarlo, y otra vez hay que sacarlo. No, regular.
So this jaleo,
Algunas veces el que no es seguro, el que es artista, algunas veces está para matarlo, que no puede dar. Pero cuando dice aquí soy yo, ahí saca la toalla.
yeah. So the jaleo,
That's the real thing. You know, from 60 years ago.
Manuel Ávila singing Petenera, Leña de los Peines, Antonio Escalona playing the guitar such a way, and then Pepe Luque and the others,
Manolillo.
Manolillo, Paul Hecht, Pablo el Americano, introducing the songs that you recorded. So it's a duo. And I was talking to Pepe Luque like 6-7 years ago about this document, and he was saying it's an historical document because you see how you were melting into the flamenco culture, and we have your pictures. So I think it's an artifact of the reality of that moment and that place. And I would like to ask you about just looking to you and now how you were reacting to the sound, and you've been mentioning about the Ole quality and the sound of color and how you were reacting to reality during the day with that memory of the flamenco you were listening at Peña Juan Breva and the Escalona's place, and how during the day you were probably nurturing that from flamenco and reacting to reality through that Ole and the jaleo. Something was happening there. Right? The mystery flamenco was in your photographs.
Yeah. The idea of duende became a really profound search for me. Like, what is duende? I mean, often in art we hear about the muse, you know, some spirit that comes and guides you and supports you and everything. But duende isn't a kind, generous spirit. It's a muse. It seemed to me, as I read Federico Garcia Lorca, and I listened to flamenco, and I saw the struggle, it appeared to me that to reach a state of, clarity that would be duende, one had to really push hard, to suffer failure, to go as far there as you are humanly capable of going. And particularly with singing and the guitar, to reach a level where you're not in control, where your voice would become something else. It would emerge from you like a cry. I mean, and often the aficionados would say, you know, rompe la voz, you know, break it, you know, you're too calm, you know, or go there being that dark place where you would lose control. So I began to take it in. I mean, it took me months before I actually felt I understood when the ole was justified, when it would come from me, like you heard at the end of that, you heard that little guy say, ole! That just rose up out of him as of appreciation, a moment of appreciation. So I think I began to recognize that life on the streets, momentary connections, were the equivalent of a kind of visual ole, that it's when things were in sync or harmonious and then back into chaos. And when they reached that point, I felt as if I was seeing more clearly, because listening to the flamenco and listening to the singers and guitarists earn the ole guided me. It's always about some kind of teaching that comes from the practice of doing it, or the guidance of some observation that you make yourself. So it's a very fragile thing, but when you experience it, it goes in as deep as you're capable of experiencing.
Very nice. And maybe we can open up the conversation to the audience. It would be great if you can answer some questions. I'm sure there will be questions here in the audience for you. We can continue anyways, but si alguien tiene alguna pregunta para Joel, estaría genial. No sé, el micrófono. Sí.
Somebody needs a microphone?
Yeah. So
you'll translate for me? Or
yeah, Concha will translate.
Concha, you'll translate.
Yeah. So you talked about this aficionado inside you. I mean, you had this aficionado giving the rhythm for you to take a picture, so pointing out to you the ole moment, right, in a way. So I think that's a beautiful thing we see in the show. So, sí. Aquí. Sí.
Buenas.
Buenas.
En el documental que hemos visto hoy en la exposición hay algo que me ha llamado mucho la atención, y es como la definición que da del flamenco, ¿no? Como el guitarrista tiene que acompañar al cantador, como el cantador tiene que acompañar al guitarrista, como los dos se van nivelando, ¿no? Entonces me ha encantado escucharlo porque realmente me he dado cuenta que entendió perfectamente lo que era el flamenco. Entonces, como la época en Málaga solo duró 6 meses, me gustaría saber ahora, como aficionado al flamenco, yo venía a hacer preguntas de fotografía, pero al final, esa afición al flamenco sí duró en el tiempo. O sea, si a día de hoy sigue siendo aficionado al flamenco, si sigue escuchando flamenco, si después de la visita a Málaga el flamenco continuó en su vida.
Are you going to translate?
Joel is obsessed.
Concha.
Conchita.
Yes. I would say for just a few years after returning to America, we were in search of flamenco in New York City. But it wasn't there. And it was cafe flamenco. It was superficial. It had no heart or enough heart. And so Vivian, my wife at the time, and I just, we felt like we'd never have that again. We'd never have this room again with those people and the intensity of life here in Malaga. And so when you can't find the thing that you're searching for, bit by bit it goes away. And periodically I would listen to the tapes because the tapes carried, I must have, I don't know, do you know how many total hours of tapes?
Thousands.
Probably 30 hours or 40 hours of tapes that I made, accumulated here and there. And I would listen to them and look at the photographs and have a sense memory. But I couldn't find it for real. Even a few times when Spanish guitarists came to New York, I would have a concert and we'd go there, it was already so polished that it was shining and it had none of this dark. I mean, you could hear when Antonio's thumb comes on those strings, there's a kind of rough force to them. And the way he works with the singer, and they work together, that isn't a planned connection. That is in the moment. Whereas when you see professionals doing it, they've done it night after night after night, and they're doing the same thing. And something goes away. Some genuine mystery goes away. So I did lose track over the years.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? ¿Alguna pregunta? Sí, a ti. ¿Sí, alguna pregunta más en la audiencia? ¿Allí? Ahí arriba también.
Sorry, the question in English. So,
Okay.
it's nice to see you today. And one question that I have for you is, so you mentioned that photographers sometimes quit after 10 years of doing photography, and obviously you're still going, and it's great. I'm curious, do you have any particular plans for the next, let's say, 5 years, photography-wise? 10.
Well, I'm 86 years old, so, I don't plan anything but waking up in the morning and seeing what that day has. So I have nothing. There are some things that I'm curious about, but I'm also at a point in my life where it's important for me to revisit the past. And so to that end, we've just scanned about 250,000 color and black and white frames so that I can look at them now, because they came from my early years. And in those days, there was no gallery system, museums weren't showing photography, there were no publishers making books because there was no audience. But now there is. And so I'm looking through a lot of the early work to see who I was then, and does that young man and this guy now have a kind of, through line? Am I staying true to the earliest excitements and thrills of photography? Do I maintain it? Have I kept going in an interesting way. So it's an opportunity for me to take a look at my own history while living out this time of my life. So trying to do as much as I can while still enjoying daily life with you, my darling. I don't want to miss a minute of it.
Sorry, one question more, if you don't mind. So during those time, I think you've been in a situation when the day began, and I don't know, like you do not feel like you want to go photographing or something. What might bring you on the streets on those days?
That reality happens to all of us. You don't necessarily, it's like being hungry. You're not always hungry, you're hungry sometimes. So, but I carry a camera with me all the time, so that when I'm walking along, if nothing's happening, I'm walking along. If something happens, I'm going to go there, because I have a camera, which means I've got the tool to see the thing that's happening. If I didn't have the camera, I would say, oh, I wish I had the camera. So better to carry it and not have to wish. And that way, one is always ready. And even to this day, when I walk on the street, as soon as I change angle on the street, I adjust the camera so that it's always set for the right exposure. I just do it as a kind of, it's a natural, it's like breathing. I just do it. And that way, if something happens, I just reach for it with the camera. And that way, all the surprises of life are still available to me. And it's important, too. When I was 28 years old or 30 years old, I was a different creature. Had a different kind of energy. I looked differently. I had a certain set of charms that I used on the street so that I would get what I wanted. But at 85, I'm a whole different person. I look differently, I move differently. So what kind of pictures am I making now at 85? And that's what I'm interested in. It's like, how do I see the world? I've seen the governments change. I've seen the wars happen and end. I've seen the protests. I've seen people grow old and die. Friends disappearing. I've seen enough that when I look at the world, I'm looking from that position, not from when I started. So what does it look like to me? That's the question that's really, I think, what you're asking me is like, what makes you want to photograph? And that's what makes me want to photograph. While I'm alive, how do I see things and how do they compare to the young version of myself? That's a good dialogue to have with oneself. Almost any time. Because if you're an artist, you want to be in dialogue with yourself so that you have a sense of your interests and how you're maintaining your energies. Okay, that's
the question there, I think. You had a question there? Yeah.
Yes. I hear it better when this is on.
Also in English. So compared to 60 years ago, would you say, how would you say it's changed to take candid street photography? Is it more difficult now or the same? Or is there some other kind of nature change over the generations?
Well, I think that's an essential question because I've heard it in different ways a number of times. Back then, nobody thought of themselves as important enough to be, the general people on the street, no one thought of themselves as important enough to be photographed. Sometimes when I raised the camera, if someone saw me, they would turn around to see if the picture was behind them, the thing that I wanted. Today, everybody with a smartphone is holding it in their hand. So on the street, you have, if you make a picture like this, you've got 31 people holding a phone, looking at a phone, listening to a phone, tapping on a phone, filming with a phone. And the pictures change. The content is about people with a device in their hands, guiding them along. They're not making interactions, eye contact with everybody else on the street, which was the sexiest, most interesting part of being a street photographer, was seeing all of the human energy, cross currents on the street itself. It was beautiful. You felt like you were in the human family. I don't feel that the same way now. And it means that there's a different way of photographing. I have to, in some ways, try to, work away from all the phones, because they change the way the photograph is understood. Oh, he or she is photographing people using cell phones. It's as if a subject has appeared that's in every goddamn picture, and you just can't get rid of it. So, you have to work with what you have, right? And by choosing discreetly, you make the kind of pictures that satisfy every individual artist.
Paco también tenía una. Bueno.
Buenas tardes. Durante el tiempo que está aquí en Málaga o que va a estar, ¿ha tenido la curiosidad o tiene la intención de revisitar algunos de los espacios que fotografió en los años 60 en Málaga? Gracias.
Well, I've been in search of a lot of those places, and fortunately, Miguel tipped me off to this place, which is right on Plaza de Constitución, right? It's right in the middle of a building.
Sociedad Económica.
Yeah.
Sí.
Yeah,
Sí,
and it has a tourist agency inside. But in the back is that very fountain. That fountain with those scalloped lines on it. And, fortunately, Miguel found it for me. And I did go back to see it, and it's nothing like that. They've ruined the space. There are big signs on that wall right there, and so it's no longer this open space where sunlight and shadow is making the same scallop design as is on the fountain. That's part of the picture's pleasure, is to see that two things, unrelated things, roof tiles above me, casting a shadow that becomes the same as the shadow on the fountain. And then that magical step, that foot disappearing. So that was just one of those moments. And I have been going around looking for the streets that I remembered. But everything has been paved over in marble. All the signage has changed. It's rare that I can find a bar or a cafe from the past. Maggie and I just found a place that is from the past, and it's a few blocks behind, Plaza Constitución, on the way to the river, and it's a little place that makes coffee, chocolate, and churros. And they've been making it since I was there 60 years ago, and it's exactly the same. They haven't changed anything. The typography on the window and the sign above, it is a homey, humble place. And it's the past. It's in the present. And they've maintained it so that they didn't have to make a tourist destination out of it. And of course, tourists find it because it's authentic. And I think people who come to visit a city like Malaga want something of that authentic past of Malaga. But instead they get, something that's been highly polished. So here and there I find these places, and it really feels good when I do. I constantly say to Maggie, oh, I remember this street,
Paco, ¿tenías una pregunta?
Buenas tardes. En un principio Joel, yo quiero llamarte Pepe. Porque
Well, my name was unpronounceable at the time if they called me Joe. So it didn't work that way.
además de Pepe, Vivian se transforma en Viviana, ¿no?
Viviana. Yeah.
Precisamente te quería preguntar por ella, porque hablabas de que tú conducías el coche, pero yo que he estudiado un poco la obra de Pablo el Americano y bueno, y los 6 meses tuyos en Málaga, creía que tenía la intención de que conducía ella, ¿no? Digo por la dificultad que tiene conducir y no echar fotos, hay que parar, ¿no? ¿O cómo lo hacías?
Well, you have to believe me that I didn't do all the driving. Vivian was a good driver, and we shared the driving. 30,000 kilometers, it's a lot of driving. So we shared all the time. So sometimes I shot out the passenger window, sometimes I shot while I was driving. It isn't difficult if you know what you're doing and if you have a kind of a way of doing it that is, you know, you feel confident. I felt completely confident doing what I was doing, like that. So in a way, I didn't even have to think about it. I just had an impulse and I responded to the impulse. There's no more to explain than that. And if you go to the show upstairs and look at that room of just those pictures, you'll see how there's a particular attitude. Part of it was my own willingness to look at things far away and believe that they had meaning, even at 100 kilometers an hour, that passage, that moment, that combination of elements had meaning to me. I never photographed it there wasn't something shocking, because that's what I need in order to make the reach for the picture, is to feel something so intensively inside me that I reach for it.
Thank you. So,
te quería preguntar, porque hay, aparte, hay por un lado una foto que es la más llamativa, son 17 personas metidas dentro de la casa de la familia Escalona, pero el otro día descubrí en el... ¿Me escuchas bien?
Now I can. I didn't hear the first part. Sorry.
Sí, perdona. Esta foto es muy conocida por ser de Málaga, de familia Escalona, y es un poco la que se ha movido en algunos álbumes y en algunos libros. Ahí está Pedro, está Ana. De hecho, hice un trabajo de campo y descubrí que todavía había muchos vivos. Pero da la casualidad de que esto es la Navidad del 66, pero un par de días antes descubrí en el vídeo que grabasteis con Ole que hay un momento muy triste. Hablo del entierro del hermano de Pepe Luque, que lo fotografiaste. Entonces, ahí me dio la impresión de que estabas totalmente integrado, porque te habían llamado para ir al entierro, o cómo fue, porque una cosa ocurrió el 22 y esto estaba ocurriendo el 24 de diciembre. Sí, yo me he vuelto loco con tu trabajo. Con tu trabajo y con Pau Gel, que por cierto decirte que estoy acompañado de una de las pocas personas que quizá conoció a Pablo, el americano. Ella es, sí, la señora de Paco Montoro, que era un gran aficionado al flamenco de la Peña y muy amigo. Decirte que Pepe Luque está vivo, que Maribel, su hermana, también está vivo, y que hay gente todavía que te recuerda, sobre todo a Pablo, ¿no?, que estuvo mucho tiempo en Málaga y que, bueno, que tampoco murió hace poco, ¿no? Me gustaba el contraste ese de estar en el cementerio y después ver otra realidad en casa con ellos, ¿no? Disfrutando de la Navidad en Málaga.
Wow. Thank you for that memory. Really, and by dating it so precisely, yeah, I think that's what we were able, Vivian and I, were able to accomplish by committing ourselves to living here and to being with the Escalonas and to being out on the street. It seemed like we were just woven into the fabric of this life here. And to me, it was the greatest, how could I say this? It was the greatest cultural experience I've ever had, to be so far outside of a society as to be an American, but to come here and to integrate in that way, almost seamlessly. Wherever the Escalonas went, or wherever I went, they came with me, or I went with them. We, Vivian and I. And it was as if the history of Malaga, the history of that moment, was unfolding, and we were in the unfolding of it. So you can imagine, as a young, impressionable person, to have something so rich in my life, you know, it was really living. That's how I could put it. It was real life, and so desirable that we never really wanted to leave until finally there came a point when it was the right moment, you know. And in fact, I'll be honest with all of you, I haven't really told this before, but at that point, Vivian and I were, you know, it wasn't a real marriage any longer, and I said to her, why don't you stay here? You're becoming a real musician. They took her everywhere to play for other singers and dancers. So why don't you stay and I'll just go. We'll be happy, you know, in our own lives like this. And Antonio kept on saying to me, right, Joe, go. You go. Leave her with us. Because they had a sense that they could develop this incredible young musician. But I think she was fearful, and she was hopeful that we might get on track in some way. And so we left together in May, sort of middle or near the end of May, to go finish the rest of our journey. So, yeah, it was a very successful transplant. The victim survived for another few months, and here I am.
So, thank you very much for the conversation. Thank you for
being
thank you,
here. Everybody,
thank you for the questions. I just want to say that I knew Malaga because of you. I know Malaga because I've been studying your work. So being here now as the artistic director, having this show and putting this kind of statement about the artist is in the center, which is something that I want to develop as an idea. Living artists working with us and being in the center of our mission. Picasso is here with us, and we have this companionship of other artists that come and create dialogues with Picasso, with the place of Picasso, which is Malaga. Malaga is the center of Europe for this exhibition. And having this opportunity to learn, and this education that you are providing to others, and this opportunity, this hope, as I mentioned the other day, something that we will always remember. And I want to thank you, and we will always remember you. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Miguel. It's really, thank you. Thank you. Oh, stand up. Thank you. Really, thank you. I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. And Maggie. Please. Do I come? No. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
So Joel, Joel is willing to sign copies of the book. Va a firmar copias del libro. Si quieren hacerse con una en la librería, nos vamos a colocar en la zona de salida por camerinos. O sea, que salen por aquí, estaremos en esta mesa de la izquierda. O sea, que salen por el auditorio, estaremos aquí en la izquierda firmando. Gracias.
Okay, so I'm going to take